welcome to everyone already joining. We'll give it a few minutes before we start, but in the meantime, please do put where you're joining from in the chat so we can see how international you are today. Seeing lots of people joining, thank you. We'll just wait another minute or two, give some latecomers a bit of time to join as well. Okay, so I think some people will still keep joining, the number is going up, but we'll get started anyway because we have a lot to cover. So a really big welcome to everyone who's joined and thank you so much. I'm really excited to be joined today by our expert panelist. So this session is the 5th in our series of monthly webinars which explore key questions and key challenges in the plant-based space. And this webinar corresponds with one of our New Food Hub white papers. So don't forget to go and check out that full report on the ProVeg New Food Hub after this webinar. So over the next 45 minutes, this discussion aims to give you all a really good understanding of some of the challenges, the solutions, and some opportunities when it comes to veganizing classic products. There'll be lots of time at the end for audience Q&A, so please do pop your questions in the Q&A section and I will be sure to address these to the panelists at the end. So just to introduce myself quickly, my name is Stephanie. I am the International Head of Food Industry and Retail at ProVeg International. And for those of you who don't know, ProVeg is a food awareness organisation with the mission to reduce the consumption of animal agriculture 50% by the year 2040. So we do this by working with stakeholders across the entire value chain, from corporate, startups, the government and policymakers, and of course the consumer. And my role specifically is to work with companies to help them create more and better plant-based products. So I would love to hand over to our panelists just to give a quick introduction of who you are, where you work, what you do. So we'll come to Carol first.
Hi, thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, my name is Carol Bingley. I work at RSSL and we're a contract research organisation. I work in the product development team and we help to support our clients with development of products. So we're working in alternatives to meat, fish and dairy and eggs as well. So right across the whole spectrum of plant-based.
That's great, thank you. I'm sure you're going to have some really good stories to tell later. Koyan.
Hi everybody, my name is Koyan van der Berg. I'm a co-founder of Fumi Ingredients and we upcycle brewer spent yeast into functional ingredients. So we are also in the space of really replacing animal-based ingredients with our single-cell protein sourced ingredients. Really coming from the scientific side of things, so I used to teach at Wageningen University and then the end of 2019 set up Fumi Ingredients. And actually recently we launched a brand with AB InBev where we are really scaling up the technology on these functional ingredients.
Thank you, that's so exciting. And then Jochen?
Yeah, hello and good morning everyone, and thanks for having me here. Yeah, so my name is Jochen Pfeiffer. I'm a food technologist and process engineer by education, and I work for Mondelez International, you know, the makers of chocolates like Cadbury Dairy Milk or Milka, biscuits, Oreo and Belvita, and Philadelphia cream cheese, as well as many other brands. My current role is a research fellow in ingredient research, and I look after protein and dairy technologies across all of our product categories.
Great, thank you. Okay, so before we start with questions, I have a poll for everybody in the audience. So are you or is your company currently looking to veganize your current product range? Let us know. Yes, all products, some products, you're in the process, you're already 100% plant-based. Select an option, please, and then we'll show the results in just a second. Let's go to the results. So yes, some people are already plant-based, which is always great to hear. But otherwise, yeah, lots of people looking to veganize their products. So you're in the right place. Thank you for coming. Hopefully you'll learn something. So I guess let's start super simple. We're talking about veganizing, but what does that mean? When we say veganizing classic products, for you, each of the panelists, what exactly does that mean and how do you think about it in your work? Does anybody want to volunteer to start?
I can start. To me, this means removing any animal-derived ingredients from the product, but trying to the resulting product being as similar to the existing product as possible. So it's not creating a completely different product. It's using ingredients to replace those which would not be acceptable to a vegan.
Lovely definition.
Yeah, and I can perhaps build on that. You know, in Mondelez International, we are committed to offer consumer choices, right? And we recognize that at least in some countries over the last few years, there's an increasing interest of consumers in fully plant-based products. Actually, many of our products are already plant-based and have always been plant-based. But now we're also seeing an opportunity to veganize some of our brands that people love and that traditionally have used some animal ingredients. So we're trying to speak to the consumers who are loyal to our brands, but want to make that change. And like Carol was saying, it's then important that the veganized products have a very similar quality and also some of the key brand characteristics, you know, that consumers associate with the classic products.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have not so much to add to this. I think Carol and Jochen, they hit the nail on this. But what we see typically is that you end up having major quality challenges when you want to veganize some of the products. So you end up losing some of the protein quality or maybe texture or flavor. They tend to change. So that is really the big challenge here.
Yeah, and we'll come to kind of deep diving into some of those challenges in a bit. So we talked about, you know, what it is. Why are we doing it? Why, Carol, are your clients asking to veganize their products? Who are they trying to reach? Jochen, what, like you mentioned, consumer choice. What kind of consumers are you trying to reach by veganizing some of the classic brands?
Yeah, I want to say it's plant-based products are one element of our larger well-being choices that we are giving consumers, right? So we have sugar-reduced, calorie-reduced products, etc. And you know, for some consumers, having an animal-free product is important for whatever reason, right? So first of all, it's about giving consumers choices. From a longer term perspective, I also see some benefits that we as manufacturers expand our toolbox, right? So I'm thinking about our longer term commitments to reduce carbon footprints, and moving from animal-based to plant-based ingredients. I think will have a great role in that. So we're kind of also filling our toolbox while we develop new products. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say really trying to reach everyone. So from those people who want to cut out meat and dairy from their diets entirely, but also looking to attract those people who are just looking to cut down on those components for whatever reason, whether it's they believe that it's a healthier lifestyle choice or whether it's sustainability concerns. So really trying to attract across the full range. I don't think we're really just focusing on vegans. I think it needs to be much broader, because we know that if products to be successful, it needs to have that appeal across the consumer base.
So an interesting, or at least I thought an interesting example that we encountered recently was when we were working with a large corporate. They basically have meatballs in the supermarket, being regular meatballs, but also the vegetarian meatballs. So meatballs that contain egg white. And we figured, these guys, they probably have a bigger incentive to change the vegetarian meatball into a completely vegan meatball, because then you can change the label. But to my surprise, they actually told me, no, actually not. We actually want to get rid of the egg white in the regular meatball first, because we see that we can make a bigger environmental impact there. Because of the current volumes of these meatballs, they are so much bigger. So they came from actually a surprisingly different perspective than what we were expecting at our company. So you see that there's a wide range of approaches to let's say, getting towards more sustainable products.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I wouldn't have thought, as you said, that would be the way to do it. Okay, so on the subject of egg white then, I want to dive into some of the challenges, particularly like the actual kind of R&D scientific challenges when it comes to replacing these ingredients. Let's start with eggs. Let's start with egg whites. What were some of the challenges that company was facing, or more generally, that people are facing when they're trying to remove egg whites? And I'm sure it would be different for each different product category, but maybe you could just shed some light on some of the challenges and how we can overcome them.
Is it okay if I start? So we are actually really working like 90% of our time in replacing egg white in meat replacers. And what we see in the last couple of years, companies have already quite successfully moved beyond egg whites and now started adopting methyl cellulose. And that's working quite okay, but now they're suddenly struggling with the clean label aspect. And also, the functionality is different than what you have with egg white. So they are now suddenly looking at protein alternatives again that are really, that are out there that can again then replace the methyl cellulose again. And then you end up having a lot of challenges as a company, because there's not a lot of alternatives out there. There's a lot of companies working on these alternatives, but as we speak right now, they are not abundantly available. And so you see all these companies that reached out to us. I think it's over 200 by now that reached out to us like, hey, can you help us with veganizing our product or cleaning up our label? And this is really one of the big challenges that we are seeing in the industry right now.
Yeah, 100%. Does anybody else have any thoughts on key challenges around egg whites?
I think eggs are, they're quite amazing, really. They are, the range of functionalities you get from an egg is quite incredible, and that's what makes it so challenging. It's very difficult to choose one single ingredient that will replicate all those different functionalities that you get from eggs. And I think it's really important when looking at to replace egg and egg white in products is to understand what that egg is doing in your product, to then help you to then guide you in terms of your ingredient choices. And I think it's great that these cleaner label options are coming through, because that's been one of the criticisms aimed at some of the earlier products that have been brought to market. The focus being very much on delivering taste and texture, And now the sort of backlash is really once you turn the pack over and you see all these ingredients that consumers don't understand and don't really, they're wondering why they're in the product. So I think that if we could see some alternatives being developed and coming to market, I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, no, I don't have direct experience with replacing egg white, but I do know that some of the applications that we have in our company are based on a very long tradition, some artisan knowledge going into that. And I think we will later perhaps talk about technical functionality of plant-based ingredients. What I wanted to mention is that even with egg white, we're struggling to understand the functionality, right? So we're getting very similar specifications from different suppliers, and we're seeing they're not performing the same in our processes. And oftentimes, I think there's more of a challenge in the process performance than it is in the finished product, because we have high speed, highly efficient lines, and then if the texture, the consistency of the material is just slightly different, it just causes it can cause a mess, right? And yeah, I think that's a challenge for all of the replacement products.
Yeah, and to add to that, so when we are testing some of our ingredients as egg white replacers at companies, the first thing they tend to do is then they just take out the egg and then replace it with the new ingredient, and then expect that it will behave exactly the same in the pilot or in the process. And then typically they come back and say, no, it's not working because it's not exactly the same. So what we also say to end users, yeah, you need to have a bit of an open mind about also your processing, that perhaps you need to make 1 or 2 modifications in the process to make these egg white replacers work in the way they are working, because none of them are 100% the same as egg white. Yeah, and that's some of the learnings some of these companies are now going through, and once it clicks, then they can move back.
In terms of those changes to the processes and the production, not just egg whites, but just generally, what are some of the kind of considerations companies need to be making when making these replacements and making it work with their current factory or their current process, or tweaking? What are some of the things that they have to be aware of and to do?
Well, one thing is, of course, how much of the ingredient you add. So typically you add, 1 to 3% of your total ingredient mix is egg white. So then they expect to be exactly the same. Now, typically egg white, as Carol rightly pointed out already, it's a fantastic ingredient when it comes to functionality. So you sometimes need to add a little bit more of these alternatives to get to the same technical functionality as what you would get with egg white. But it's also coming down to the way of adding ingredients. Sometimes you now need to add an ingredient first, while in the previous iteration with egg white, it was the other way around. So that is some of these new ways of thinking that companies need to be aware of, and then it's definitely possible to just replace egg white in a variety of products.
And in terms of like milk or milk powder, how does that differ? What are some of the challenges or considerations when looking to replace milk powder products?
Yeah, I think I can kind of reiterate what Koyan said. I think the first step is you need to understand what the milk ingredients are doing in your current matrix, right? And that varies widely. So if you think about a cream cheese, the protein is an emulsifier and also forms a particle gel, right? So that functionality is very important as compared to, let's say, a chocolate, where the protein is entrapped in a particle, doesn't really have any functionality until you put it in your mouth and it interacts with the saliva, right? So the role of the protein is totally different. And then if we stay with chocolate, if you think about the functionality of the fat component, well, that actually is very important for the texture of a chocolate, right? It's giving it the softness and the tenderness So you need to understand what you expect from your or what your milk ingredient is doing, right? And then perhaps in addition to the technical functionality, you may or may not want to maintain the nutrition profile in terms of total fat, carbohydrates, sugars, and then that guides you what the replacement ingredients are that you can look at. Yeah, so understanding what the food matrix is, I think that's a key in the whole journey. Yeah.
Or did you have anything to add?
I was just going to say as well, for some products, the nutritional profile is going to be important to consider as well. So if we're thinking about milk alternatives, obviously these are a really good source of protein, as well as micronutrients. So it's thinking about the functionality, but also about the nutritional profile of any ingredients that you're using as alternatives.
Maybe we could, I don't know how much you'd be able to share, but I'd love to kind of hear a story, an experience that you've each had where, you've had a challenge or you've made a mistake when you've been trying to veganize a product, whether that's for your brand or a company that you've worked with. Like, tell us a kind of a mistake or a challenge that you've had and how you overcame that in your journey.
I would say one of the big challenges we've got at the moment is we're starting to work more and more in the white fish area. And one of the big challenges is because, again, we're looking to usually deliver a comparable protein content to fish because, fish is obviously very rich in protein. But many of the plant-based proteins are beige, pale brown. It's really, really difficult to get to a product which looks like a white fish. And there are certainly improvements in some of the ingredients, but another limitation we have is often that our clients are looking to avoid allergens, so looking to avoid ingredients such as wheat and soya, which tend to give slightly paler proteins to start with. So I'd say that's something that's an ongoing challenge for us, is how to get to a whiter base product certainly for the fish area. And it's fine. Well, it can be easier if you're coating the fish, if it's going to be breaded or battered, because then the color is less apparent. But we know that many consumers are looking for these products. Their motives are health driven. So they're not necessarily wanting to look for a product that's covered in batter. They want a fish fillet or maybe a prawn or something like that can be added into dishes. So I'd say that's one of the biggest challenges we're facing at the moment.
Interesting, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and I can maybe share a little bit, perhaps not about mistakes, but the learning journey that our teams went through when we have recently launched a plant-based Philadelphia alternative. So one thing that we have realized is, and I think that's true for the whole dairy sector, right? We have a very, very long tradition in developing very specific products. We clearly understand the slight changes which make the difference, let's say, between a cheddar cheese and Roquefort, etc., etc. So generations of dairy technologists have worked on that, and now all of a sudden we are working with a totally different material, and how do you process that? So it starts from when we work with milk, we get a liquid ingredient, and then to make a cheese we basically extract the protein and remove some of the other components, right? If it's plant-based, it's more likely that we get a powder component, right? So then it starts from how do we blend the powders, how do we rehydrate the ingredients so that they can develop the functionality. And the other area which is still a little bit of a challenge is flavor formation, right? So in cream cheese, milk actually is quite bland in flavor, so the flavor is coming from the culture. And traditionally, you develop the flavor at the same time where you coagulate the protein to then be able to extract it, right? So this fermentation follows a specific time and temperature profile, and the aroma compounds are formed to different degrees in different stages, etc., etc. And again, it's a whole art behind that, and our vendors have developed specialized culture mixes for the different types of dairy products that are on the market. Now, we still want to use fermentation to generate flavor in the plant-based alternative, but the substrate and the conditions and the time and the acidity that you need to develop to get to the same pH, that's all very different, right? And I think the whole industry is still in its infancy compared to classic dairy technology. Yeah, so it's just it's a great learning journey. I think we have made great progress, but yeah, still not quite where we are with the classic dairy products. And the same is probably true for chocolates, you know, where the classic processes are quite historical and traditional, I would say, still. Yeah.
Yeah. Hoya?
Yeah, so one of the big learnings for us is that typically when companies come to us, they say, hey, we want to replace 1 or 2 ingredients in the current recipe. And what we've seen so far, and then these companies have basically tried everything. So they are really desperate to replace these ingredients, but they are desperate to a certain extent because they want to keep everything the same and only change 1 ingredient. And in the end, I think what we are starting to understand is that you need to rebuild these type of products from the ground up, and not just start adding a bandage upon a bandage and upon a bandage and then hope that it still tastes perfect. That's not how things go. So I think these companies need to really build these products from the ground up with understanding these plant functionalities a little bit better than what we did maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And I think that's possible, but it requires a certain mindset.
Yeah, 100%. I think I feel like brands sometimes think it would be easier than maybe it is. But we have lots of cool ingredient companies like yourselves helping everything now. At ProVeg, we get a lot of brands coming to us and asking for like recommendations of ingredients. Have you all got any either recommendations of ingredients that brands can use, or just kind of suggestions on what kind of questions you should be asking a potential supplier to understand if the ingredient is right for what you're trying to do?
Carol.
Well, quite difficult because obviously it depends on the final application. So, I mean, you need to be thinking about what you're trying to achieve. You know, if possible, look for ingredients which are multifunctional. So, you know, thinking about trying to keep the ingredient list as short as possible. So if you can use an ingredient which maybe will provide some texture and also some emulsification or some gelling in the product, then you know that can be really helpful. But yeah, it's a difficult one to answer because it is very application specific.
And I think when it comes to keeping ingredient lines short, then there's a fine balance between ingredients which are more processed and functionalized, such as protein isolates, as compared perhaps to a flour or protein concentrate. And I think the opportunity with the flours and concentrates is that you can also take advantage of the texture building potential of the fiber and starch, carbohydrates that you have in your product, and it helps you to have a cleaner ingredient line, right? When people see perhaps a lentil flour that's more consumer friendly compared to a lentil protein isolate. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Did you want to add anything?
No, I mean, this is perfect. No, it's true. Yeah.
Thank you. So we mentioned earlier about, having to like change the processing or production to veganize the product. Can we talk a little bit about equipment in the factory, I guess, and its role in the viability of veganizing products? What do companies need to do? Do they need to purchase new equipment? Do they just need to change a little bit about what they're doing? Like, what is the role of that side of things in this process?
So from what we've seen and what we've learned so far, it doesn't have to be a dramatic change. It can perhaps be just a simple additional mixer where you mix the ingredients in a slightly different way. What you need to be careful of is when you mix these ingredients with some water, you can get completely different viscosities. So things can become much thicker or thinner, and that can have a dramatic effect in your further downstream processing of your food product. So you need to be very careful there and balance it out, because in the end, most of these companies have been optimizing all these lines for tens of years, decades. So yeah, then suddenly you get a completely different product going through your line. So yeah, it's a balancing act, I'd say. But I guess Jochen has way more learnings in this.
Again, it depends on the application, right? We have also developed a plant-based Cadbury chocolate, and so in the case of chocolate, we replace basically a powder ingredient with a nut paste and another powder ingredient. So the factories are very familiar with handling these types of ingredients, right? So it's then perhaps a matter of do we need an additional balance tank, additional dosing systems, etc., etc. Do you want to make that investment right at the beginning? Do you want to make a product which initially has a smaller volume? Do you want to make that on your high-speed lines, or can you find another place where you do that? So from a chocolate processing perspective, I want to say it was relatively simple as compared to cream cheese, right? So as I said, normally we start from milk. Now we have to bring in powders and add them at relatively high dosage levels. So that obviously is then new equipment for the factory. And there might also be some challenges at the back end, right? So when it comes to the filling lines, we obviously want to use the same existing filling line, and filling lines are designed for certain consistencies, certain viscosities, etc., etc. So the correlation between filling viscosity and finished product properties might be different between the classic and the plant-based product, right? And then what do you do, right? You have to make some adjustments, and I think there's a great potential in using physical treatments, right? So in the dairy industry, we work a lot with homogenizers and heat treatments, and we homogenize twice, and we change the order, and that's again that's based on the long experience that we have, I think the same unit operations can probably be used for the plant-based products, where we just have to find out what the right process settings are, again to make it perform well in the process.
And I'd just like to add, if the same factory is being used to make the traditional product as well as the veganized version, then it's important to consider allergens, because you may be introducing new allergens with the ingredients that you're using to replace the animal derived ingredients. So it could be nuts, or it could be soya, for example. Or if you're using milk and eggs in your traditional product, then you may have to declare on back of pack, well, you will have to declare on back of pack that the product is made in a facility that handles those ingredients. And although that is permitted for example, Vegan Society accreditation will permit and may contain it, we've seen that consumers who are allergic to eggs or milk will see vegan on front of pack and assume that product is safe to eat, and that has led to some potential reactions. So I think it's an area that's quite complicated and needs careful consideration if you're going to be handling both in the same factory.
Yeah, fully agree, and it goes both ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're making the plant-based and the conventional cream cheese in the same factory, on the one hand we have the milk, on the other hand we have the nut ingredients, and but we're trying to have as short as possible allergen profiles on our products, and we're trying to have the one and the same allergen profile for the whole factory, just to largely reduce the risk of cross-contaminations due to mistakes, etc. So then it's a careful consideration where you want to, or where you can make these plant-based products. Or can you make them without allergens? Yeah, of course, preferred. Yeah,
goes back to your ingredient selection and whether what the options are.
Thank you. So we have 10-ish minutes left. I'm seeing some questions in the Q&A, so please do pop some more in there if you have any, audience. But before we go on to audience Q&A, I have 2 more questions which are a bit more kind of down the supply chain of talking to the consumer. So should brands be communicating that these new products are vegan? Should they do it in stealth mode and just veganize it and not really communicate that to the consumer? Does the branding vegan put off mainstream consumers? Does anybody have any thoughts on their experiences with kind of communicating these changes in their brands?
I think that a lot of the consumer research is indicating that plant-based is a preferred message for the mainstream consumer. Vegan seems to be a little bit off-putting for those people who are just looking to reduce the amount of meat or dairy in their diets. So that I'm seeing more and more products really sort of focusing on the plant-based messaging, and then maybe having a vegan logo somewhere on the pack, but certainly not leading with that.
Yeah,
I go, please.
Yeah, I would go back to what I said in the beginning. It's about providing consumers more choice, right? And if you have a classic brand and now all of a sudden you also have a plant-based version, why would you do that in stealth mode, right? You want to inform the consumer, and yes, whether you call it vegan or plant-based, that's a different story. But I think you want to communicate it, that there's more choice now. Yeah, absolutely.
There's one tricky aspect to going to fully plant-based instead of saying vegan, and this is also something that we are struggling with as Fumi ingredients. It's the use of microorganisms. So think of fungi, think of yeast, bacteria, all these upcoming technologies. Technically, they are not plant-based, although quite some companies are saying, yes, we are plant-based, but in reality, it is not. And so that part of industry needs to figure out how we are going to call ourselves. But that is
that's a good point. And that we're seeing animal-free being used on some of the precision fermentation ingredients, but I don't know how appealing that is to consumers. I'm not sure.
You also see a GMO-free in those labels as well, which is it's kind of true.
That's interesting. I think as more and more kind of gets commercialized, we'll see a shift towards whatever language is most preferred. And then last question for me before we go to audience, price. So I've seen often some of these veganized tend to be a bit more expensive than the kind of original product. how should we be weighing up creating a product that is like true to its original versus achieving price parity? Are these ingredients more expensive? Can you only do lower batches, which makes it more expensive? Like, how do you think about pricing? I'm sorry if I can hear the on me this one.
Go.
It's challenging, I think, particularly if you're taking an existing product and creating a vegan or plant-based version of that, because it's then difficult to charge a lot more for the vegan version. You know, for consumers to make that first sort of purchase and try the product, it's a big step for them to have to take to pay a lot more for it. But on the whole, these ingredients are still much more expensive than the ingredients used in the traditional products, and it's for a variety of reasons. So one route is to maybe reduce serving size and manage it through that approach, so that you're paying the same for the unit. It may be a slightly smaller unit. I've seen some research suggesting that we will start to move to parity, but it will be those ingredients which are produced at scale, have maybe been around for a number of years, rather than these newer ingredients where you've got a lot of research and development costs that have gone into bringing those to market. So that needs to be recouped in some way. So I think price is an ongoing challenge and is a barrier to purchase for a number of consumers, particularly when we think about the current cost of living crisis that we're seeing at the moment.
Now, if I may add to this, so what we are seeing, let's say again, from very let's say previous discussions where companies are just trying to do the one-to-one replacement of our ingredients with egg white, then you always get the question, yes, but you're more expensive. And of course, they are right. We are more expensive when we are trying to just do a one-to-one replacement with the current recipes. Our point here is that when you design a new recipe with a new binding agent from the ground up, you can actually get a lower cost of use compared to a lot of other binding and gelling agents. So it requires some rethinking on your whole recipe, and then you can really get to very acceptable cost of use numbers compared to, and you don't need to go for some sort of big vegan plant-based premium that nobody really wants to pay.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. It's finding the balance between the premium that consumers are willing to pay and still having the expected profitability at the end of the day, right? And it's ingredients are one side. We're typically making smaller batches, so we have more changeovers, etc., more cleaning, and that adds to the pure ingredient cost as well, and it needs to be recovered.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So we have a question from the audience. From an anonymous attendee. How can we make vegan yogurt to have a long shelf life without any chemical preservatives? Anyone has any thoughts on that?
Well, I suppose it depends if you want to include live cultures in there or not. I mean, if that's not part of the product, then there are process options in terms of hot filling or pasteurizing in pack or HPP. There are some ingredients coming to the market. I'm looking at a rowan berry extract at the moment, which is a natural source of sorbic acid, which can have some preservative effects. So again, that might help to extend. I don't know how much, when they say long shelf life, I'm not sure how long you're looking to achieve, but you may be able to extend the shelf life through the use of some of these naturally derived ingredients.
Great, thank you. So we have 1 minute left. Just to summarize, I'd love just to get you all to share one key takeaway, one piece of advice. We've said it depends on the application, but one overall piece of advice that the audience can take away with them on how best to veganize a product.
I would say start from understanding your existing product, and then perhaps collaborate a lot with your vendors, etc., because we're all learning, right? And take advantage of all the learnings that we're having from academia over the vendors to the likes of us.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think it's important to understand what's core and what's flex, because you will have to make compromises. Inevitably there will be an area where you need to make a compromise. You're not going to be able to do everything that you maybe set out to do. So being clear about what's important to your target consumer.
My take is that there's no easy one-to-one plant-based replacer out there for your animal-based ingredients. So keep an open mind when you are somewhat redesigning your, let's say, your current recipes, and talk to and be willing to learn from ingredient suppliers. So these people have a lot of experience in their own ingredients. So I think it's you need to collaborate really together with some ingredient suppliers to make something that is fully vegan.
100%. I think collaboration is super important. It's why we do this. And so I hope that everyone has learned something from all of your lessons, and maybe you've learned something from each other. I don't know, I've definitely learned a lot. But yeah, thank you so much to all of our panelists. I think this has been a really interesting discussion, and I think we could go even deeper, and I'm sure if anyone in the audience wanted to reach out, I'm sure you would be happy to talk one-on-one with them all. Yeah. So we will be posting a summary of this webinar and the recording as well after. So please do check that out. Please do also check out the New Food Hub for a deeper dive on this topic, but also on other topics from marketing, product development, sustainability. And yeah, have a lovely rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.